You cannot build a serious company by labeling boxes for old people, my brother Glenn said. He laughed before anyone else could decide whether the remark was funny. My niece Sophie had just told the family that I had offered her an operations job. Glenn looked across the restaurant table at me and added, "Celia has a helpful little service, but it is not a career." I let the silence settle. He had no idea that 31 franchise owners were waiting for my signature that month. My name is Celia Ward. I was 63, widowed, and the founder of Silver Lining Home Transitions. We helped older adults move from long-time homes into smaller apartments, retirement communities, or relatives' houses. Our teams sorted belongings, coordinated movers, built floor plans, arranged donations, unpacked kitchens, hung pictures, and made unfamiliar rooms feel livable before clients arrived. The work began 18 years earlier with my Aunt Ruth. After a fall, she had to leave the farmhouse where she had lived for 46 years. Every drawer held a decision, and every decision carried a memory. The moving company could transport furniture, but nobody was responsible for helping Ruth choose what would fit, or making sure her medication and favorite teacup were waiting beside her new chair. I spent 3 weeks organizing that move. A nurse at Ruth's residence asked whether I could help another family. Then a social worker called. I printed simple cards at the library and worked from the trunk of a 12-year-old station wagon. During the first year, I earned less than I had made as an office manager, but families kept referring other families. My late husband, Aaron, treated the work seriously before I did. He built shelving in our garage, created color-coded inventory sheets, and insisted that I charge for planning instead of apologizing for it. When he died 11 years later, I considered selling the company. Instead, I hired an operations manager and learned which parts of the business could function without my grief making every decision. Glenn saw only the early years. He remembered the station wagon, the folding labels, and the evenings when I washed donated dishes in my sink. He worked in regional sales for a medical supply company and measured legitimacy through offices, expense accounts, and printed titles. To him, my work remained a compassionate favor that had accidentally learned to send invoices. I did not correct him at every family gathering. Silver Lining had grown from 1 crew to 4 company-owned branches. A consultant helped us document every procedure. We built training modules, insurance standards, vendor rules, and a client protection policy for handling jewelry, documents, and medication. After 9 years, our first franchise opened 2 counties away. Franchising was slower than people imagined. I rejected the first 3 applicants because they wanted a cheap moving brand without the patient work. Each approved owner completed 8 weeks of training and carried specific insurance. We audited client files, complaint response, employee checks, donation records, and referral disclosures. Growth that ignored vulnerable clients would have made the company larger and worse. By the night of Sophie's announcement, Silver Lining had 31 active franchise territories across 11 states. The system employed more than 200 people. The network had completed nearly 4,000 transitions during the prior year. Company revenue from our branches, training, royalties, and approved support services exceeded $6 million, though the franchise owners kept most local service revenue. My personal finances had changed quietly. I owned the trademarks, the training company, and the majority of the original branches. I had paid off my house, funded retirement accounts, and accumulated a net worth above $4 million. None of that made Glenn's remark wrong because I was rich. It made his understanding of the work incomplete. Sophie was 26 and had spent 2 years coordinating events for a hotel. She was organized, calm with anxious customers, and unusually good at noticing the person who had stopped speaking. I offered her a regular salary position in franchise support after she completed the same interview process as other candidates. She would not report to me. Glenn believed I was giving her a temporary family favor. He told Sophie she should stay in hospitality until a management title opened. She replied that Silver Lining had offered better training, predictable hours, and work she respected. That was when he made the joke about labeling boxes. I asked one question: "What do you think the company does?" Glenn shrugged. You help people clean out houses. That is one part, I said. Sophie has seen the position description. He smiled as if I had confirmed his point. I only want her to think bigger. Sophie put down her fork. You mean think in a direction you recognize. I did not reveal revenue or ownership at the table. Sophie's choice did not need to be defended with my balance sheet. I told her the offer would remain open for 5 business days and that she should accept only if the work fit her. Then I changed the subject to our mother's upcoming birthday. 3 weeks later, Glenn's employer announced a merger. His regional division would be combined with another one, and his position would end after a 90-day transition. He received severance, but he had also refinanced his house the previous year and was helping his younger son with college tuition. For the first time in decades, his impressive title did not protect his schedule. Glenn told the family that he welcomed the change. Privately, he applied for 6 corporate jobs. 2 interviews ended after the first round. One company wanted him to relocate. Another offered less than half his former salary. His confidence became sharper around the edges, especially when anyone asked how the search was going. Meanwhile, Sophie accepted the position at Silver Lining. She completed orientation with 4 employees who were not related to me. Her supervisor, Marisol Chen, corrected her first client support report and sent it back for missing consent documentation. Sophie later told me that the correction reassured her. The family connection had not purchased easier standards. Glenn called me after Sophie's second week. He asked whether I could create a regional director role for him. I told him no such vacancy existed. He said his sales experience could help me turn the service into a real franchise. I said we already had a franchise system and that sales was only one part of qualification. There was a long pause. How many franchises? I answered that detailed information was available through the formal inquiry process. Glenn laughed again, but this time it sounded uncertain. He said he was not going to fill out forms to have a conversation with his sister. I said a family conversation was free, but a business application required the same records from everyone. He did not apply then. Instead, he contacted a franchise broker recommended by a former colleague. The broker presented 3 concepts that fit his background and available capital. One was Silver Lining Home Transitions. Glenn later admitted that he had assumed another company used a similar name. Our holding company appeared on the summary as SLHT Systems, not my personal name. The broker sent him the franchise disclosure document after the required consent steps. Glenn opened it at his kitchen counter. Item 20 included tables showing openings, transfers, closures, and the contact information of current and former franchisees. The attached list ran for pages. 31 operating territories appeared by state, along with 4 signed locations preparing to launch. My name appeared as founder and chief executive in the management section. Marisol appeared as vice president of operations. The document described company history, fees, litigation status, audited financial statements, training obligations, and the limits of any earnings representation. It was not a glossy family claim. It was a regulated disclosure that expected careful reading. Glenn called at 7:12 the next morning. He did not say hello. I saw the franchise list. Then you saw the people doing the work, I replied. Why did you never tell me it was this large? You never asked a question after deciding what it was. He said families should not need a legal document to learn that someone had become successful. I reminded him that our mother knew. Sophie had researched the company, and I had invited him to an anniversary event twice. He had declined both because he assumed they were small staff lunches. Glenn's embarrassment quickly turned into suspicion. He asked whether I had arranged for the broker to show him Silver Lining. I had not. The broker's recommendation came from Glenn's capital range, management experience, and preferred industries. I offered to have our compliance counsel confirm that I had not seen his inquiry before the document was issued. He asked what a franchise owner could earn. I told him the disclosure contained only the approved financial performance information and that he should speak with several owners. I would not promise an outcome. Franchise results depended on territory, sales discipline, staffing, referral trust, costs, and the owner's willingness to follow systems. Then he asked whether I would waive his initial fee. I said no. The fee paid for training, launch support, territory analysis, and staff time. Waiving it for my brother would shift his cost onto other owners and make enforcement harder later. If he entered the system, our relationship had to survive written standards. Glenn accused me of enjoying the reversal. I understood why it looked that way. Years of being dismissed had created a small, unattractive satisfaction in me. I admitted that the call was difficult to receive without remembering the restaurant. But I also told him that humiliation was not a qualification test. I suggested that he spend 2 observation days with an existing owner before deciding. He chose Malik Thompson, who operated a territory 90 miles away. Malik had once managed a logistics warehouse and had built his branch over 5 years. He agreed to host Glenn without giving private client details. On the first morning, Glenn expected to discuss marketing. Instead, he watched a team prepare for a move involving a woman with early memory loss. Every box was coded by destination and photographed under consent. Medication never entered team custody. Jewelry went directly to the daughter. A floor plan prevented furniture from arriving that would block a walker. The second appointment involved a family arguing over donations. Malik stopped to work until the authorized client confirmed decisions. That delay cost time, but it protected the team and the family. Glenn saw that the operation depended on restraint as much as speed. A careless owner could damage a client and the entire brand. Afterward, Malik showed him staffing ratios, referral sources, vehicle costs, and complaint logs. He also explained that his first year had been financially modest. Hospital and senior community relationships took time. The franchise system provided tools, but it did not manufacture trust. Glenn returned home quieter than he had left. Sophie noticed the change but refused to become our messenger. She told both of us that she would not carry comments between her father and her employer. I supported that boundary. She was building her own work identity, and neither Glenn's insecurity nor my history should make her position a family courtroom. Glenn submitted an application. The financial review showed enough capital for one territory if he adjusted his launch plan, but his proposed staffing budget was too low. He wanted to perform sales, assessments, and operations management himself. Our review committee required him to fund an experienced move coordinator within 6 months. He called the requirement excessive. I recused myself from the committee decision because he was my brother. Marisol explained that owner exhaustion had contributed to 2 early franchise transfers. The policy existed before Glenn applied. He could revise the plan, withdraw, or appeal with new evidence. For 2 days, he said nothing. Then he revised the budget, reduced the office expense, and included a coordinator. He also called 5 franchise owners from the disclosure list, including one who had sold a territory. Their answers were not uniformly flattering. Training was demanding, software changes had caused frustration, and local hiring remained difficult. That honesty increased his confidence more than praise would have. The committee approved him conditionally. Approval did not mean I financed the purchase. Glenn used part of his severance, a bank loan, and a smaller investment account. I gave him the standard documents and no private guarantee. He received the same 14-day review period and was urged to consult his own attorney and accountant. Our mother learned about the application before the agreement was signed. She asked whether we could work together without turning every disagreement into childhood. I told her that was exactly why the paperwork mattered. Affection could soften a conversation, but it should not erase responsibilities owed to employees, clients, lenders, or other franchisees. Glenn signed for a territory that included 2 suburban counties. At training, he was one of 3 new owners. The other 2 did not know he was my brother until he mentioned it. By then, they had already watched Marisol reject his assessment exercise for speaking over a fictional client. He repeated the exercise and passed. His launch was not dramatic. The first months produced 4 paid transitions. 1 referral partner postponed a presentation. A coordinator he wanted to hire chose another employer. Glenn called Malik for advice more often than he called me. That was healthy. The system needed peers, not a founder relative solving every ordinary problem. During month 3, Glenn made a mistake. He approved a local advertisement that described silver lining as taking away the stress of moving. A caregiver complained that the promise sounded absolute. Compliance required the ad to be changed. Glenn argued that every company used language like that, then removed it and apologized to the franchise council. The correction mattered. He had spent years selling products through competitive claims. Our clients often arrived tired, grieving, or afraid. We could reduce practical burdens, but we could not promise to remove grief. Glenn began to understand that the business was serious, partly because it respected what it could not fix. Sophie advanced through her own path. 6 months after joining, she designed a schedule for onboarding new referral partners without overwhelming branch staff. Marisol adopted part of it across the network and credited her in the internal meeting. I did not attend the performance review. Sophie earned the result without needing her aunt as witness. Glenn's territory reached operating break-even during its 11th month. That was later than his original projection and earlier than the conservative case in his revised plan. He hired the coordinator required by approval and gave her authority over daily schedules. His sales experience helped, but listening kept the referrals. At our mother's next birthday dinner, nobody announced revenue. Glenn brought a framed photograph of his first team and placed it beside her cake. When a cousin asked how he liked retirement, he said he had not retired. He was learning a business his sister had spent 18 years building. Benny looked at me and apologized for the restaurant remark. He did not say he had only been joking. He said the joke had protected him from examining work he did not understand. I accepted the apology, but I did not turn it into a speech about winning. We still disagreed. Glenn pushed for faster vendor approvals. I thought he sometimes treated the franchise council like a sales meeting. He thought I protected procedures longer than necessary. Those arguments became specific instead of personal. A disagreement about software no longer carried the hidden claim that my entire career was a hobby. One disagreement concerned a storage company that offered national discounts. Glenn liked the pricing and wanted immediate approval. Our review found that its liability terms placed too much risk on clients when containers remained overnight. Glenn gathered alternative language from the vendor instead of calling the review timid. The revised contract protected clients and saved money. His impatience became useful once he aimed it at the actual obstacle. Another lesson came from a transition that went wrong in his territory. A new employee placed family photographs in a donation staging area before the client had approved them. The mistake was caught before anything left the house, but the client felt frightened. Glenn reported the incident, paused the employee's fieldwork, and arranged retraining. He did not hide it to protect his first-year statistics. I joined the review call only after compliance collected the facts. Glenn apologized to the client, without promising that no mistake would ever happen again. He explained the correction and offered to pay for an independent inventory check. The client continued with the move. Her trust returned gradually, not because we demanded forgiveness, but because the branch responded without defensiveness. That case reached the franchise council in anonymized form. Owners asked for a clearer visual boundary between items awaiting decisions and items approved for donation. Sophie worked with training staff on a two-stage tag system. The change looked small, yet it addressed the exact moment when uncertainty had caused harm. A business built on labels still had reasons to take labels seriously. Glenn later told me that the incident changed how he understood accountability. At his former company, reports often moved upward until responsibility became difficult to locate. In Silver Lining, a photograph placed on the wrong table could carry 40 years of meaning. The scale of the network did not reduce that meaning. It multiplied our obligation to protect it. Our mother visited Glenn's branch during an open house. She watched him explain a sample floor plan to a group from a senior center. On the drive home, she told me he finally sounded less like a man selling certainty and more like a man offering a careful process. I did not repeat that compliment to Glenn. She gave it to him herself the following week. I also invited Glenn to a quarterly financial meeting as an elected franchise representative. He saw royalty income beside training costs, insurance, software support, field audits, and the reserve for client emergencies. The numbers were substantial, but they were not a pile I had collected alone. They represented obligations stretching across every territory on the list. He asked why I had never sold the system when a private investment group approached 2 years earlier. The offer would have made me wealthier immediately. I declined because the buyer wanted to reduce field support before proving that automation could replace it. I was not opposed to a future sale. I was opposed to treating trust as an expense that could be cut first. Glenn admitted he might have accepted. I said that was possible, and it did not make him cruel. His career had trained him to value scale and efficiency. Mine had trained me to ask what failure felt like inside a client's room. The company needed both questions, provided neither question erased the other. Sophie eventually learned about our conversation and laughed at the idea that either of us had achieved perfect wisdom. She reminded me that I had delayed replacing outdated scheduling software because I trusted familiar routines. She reminded Glenn that he had proposed 3 marketing campaigns before learning the complaint process. Her honesty was easier to receive because her job no longer depended on pleasing either relative. At the end of his first year, Glenn could have expanded into an adjacent county. He declined. Staffing was stable, but his coordinator was preparing for maternity leave, and 2 referral relationships were still new. The old Glenn would have treated available territory as proof he should claim it. The new decision showed patience without anyone asking him to perform humility. I approved the adjacent territory for another applicant after the normal review. Glenn felt disappointed, but he did not accuse me of denying family. He welcomed the new owner and shared a referral contact near their boundary. That action mattered more to me than his birthday apology because it showed that equal rules had become behavior. Our relationship improved outside work as well. We began having breakfast once a month with the rule that the first 30 minutes contained no franchise discussion. Sometimes we failed. Mostly we talked about our mother, Erin, Sophie, and the strange adjustments of getting older. Respect grew through ordinary contact after the dramatic surprise had passed. The franchise list continued to grow, but I stopped using the number as my private answer to disrespect. Lists measured territories, not care. One poorly handled move could injure more trust than a new location created. Success required us to remain accountable after the surprise had faded. I also changed my part of the family pattern. I had used privacy to avoid boasting, but sometimes I used it to avoid being known. I began sharing ordinary facts about my work before assumptions hardened. I did not disclose accounts at dinner. I simply stopped shrinking 18 years into the phrase, "I help people move." Glenn kept the original disclosure document in a drawer at his office. The franchise list that shocked him eventually became outdated as locations opened and transferred. He said the document reminded him how confidently he had judged a company without learning its name on paper. My brother laughed at my business because its first tools were labels, floor plans, and patience. He changed when he saw the franchise list, but the list was only evidence. The deeper correction came from watching the work, accepting equal standards, and learning that dignity can be built through tasks other people overlook. Quiet success did not make me better than him. It made careless dismissal harder to defend.